We've just wrapped up Supercars' only night race of the year, and while the event didn't have quite the same level of racing action as we saw in Townsville, it was still an interesting weekend with plenty of storylines. They include the championship picture, which I feel is brewing quite nicely, and that's the first thing I'll chat about today. Then I want to chat about this Sydney SuperNight event itself, which I feel like has finally hit a bit of a stride after a few years of experimentation. And then I'll finish up by chatting about these 200-kilometer long races, which I feel could also be a bit of a sweet spot and a blueprint for other events in the future. Alright, talking point number one. Is the championship on? And by on, I don't just mean the battle between the two bulls. We may have some other drivers entering the fray. Of course, most notably, Chaz Mostert. I said in my preview for this weekend that this round was going to be an important one. We're past the halfway point of the season now, and we've got this slightly awkward 3 to 4 week break in racing action. So everyone's got plenty of time to think on these trajectories that they're being left with, and they're interesting trajectories if you are a neutral in the championship. Of course, we've had the battle brewing between Brock Feeney and Will Brown in the Red Bulls for a while now, but we're starting to see an outsider enter the picture in Chaz Mostert, who obviously had a fantastic weekend in Townsville, but has gone even better this weekend at the Sydney SuperNight, dominating both those races. Well, probably not dominating, but securing solid victories in both. And that is good news, because it's one thing to have a battle between teammates for a driver's championship, but it gets all the more exciting when you have another team involved, and even better when they're on the other side of the brand divide. And that's really what's tantalizing in these next few weeks for us as fans. These trajectories point towards an exciting back end of this year's championship. Red Bull have been a little bit shaky. I'm sure they're going to recover that form, but WAU on the other hand must be starting to dream of what might be possible if they can keep this consistency up. That said, of course, this break in proceedings could also reset those trajectories, and it's going to be interesting to see who comes out swinging in Tassie. My second key talking point is the Sydney SuperNight itself. Have we finally found the formula for this event? Because for all the glitz and glamour of night racing, it's proved a tricky one to get right in the past. Of course, night racing is a challenge when you've got multiple races over the weekend. If you hold the first race on a Friday, you're going to struggle to get a crowd there after work. And then if you hold your second night race on a Sunday, of course, crowd numbers once again will be hit by the fact they're about to go back to work. Saturday's always a safe bet, but we've always seen them struggle with where they fit this second race in at Sydney. And this year, I feel like they took a big step forward. It felt far more rounded as an event. Not only did we have a race of equal length, it also had its own little unique element with the fact that it was twilight, which I think was a really good balance. It meant it was still glitzy, but it didn't run too late into the evening. My biggest issue with the Sydney SuperNight now is not the structure of the event, but the time of year it's held. Like a lot of you guys, I think they really need to find a way to get this event closer to the warmer months, because it looked really uncomfortable there on Saturday night. And while of course the diehards like us, we're always going to get out there no matter the conditions, if the sport wants to appeal to new fans who just want to give the sport a go trackside for the first time, you really do have to make it quite inviting. And those wintry conditions, I think, will put a lot of those casual or potential fans off heading to the circuit. But overall, I think this weekend was positive for the Sydney SuperNight. I feel like they're 75% of the way there now with this event, and again, if they can get it towards those warmer months, I think it would just take it to that next level. And finally, let's chat about this 200-kilometer race length. It's been the talk of the town among the drivers recently. In both the Drivers Only podcast episodes, which is a new podcast Supercars are running, which is basically the drivers talking nonsense, but it's a really interesting insight into how they feel about the current setup of the sport. And in both of those episodes, Cameron Waters especially really pushed for a reduction in the race length at places like Townsville, down from 250 to 200 kilometers in length, like we saw in Sydney this weekend. And now, I haven't always been a big fan of this suggestion. I'm a big fan of the 250 kilometer races, as many of you know. But this weekend in Sydney, it started to shift my perspective a little bit. I really enjoyed the 200k race length. It It was long enough to feel like you got lots of strategy divergence, as we saw, but not so long that it felt like the cars were just circulating with not much change in the results, barring, of course, a safety car. And I think this could be a good blueprint moving forward. Of course, I'd love to see 250-kilometer races as the standard everywhere, but unfortunately money will always be a factor, and I'm sure that is the ultimate reason why super sprint events exist. However, even in Gen 2 and into Gen 3, super sprints have never worked, in my opinion. They put up really two-dimensional racing that honestly can be a little bit of a procession, and we saw Chaz Mostert in the press conference quite vocal about that very point. So I too would love to see a pair of 200-kilometer races become the new standard at what are currently super sprint events like Perth, Darwin and Tasmania, of course, coming up. It's still going to increase the total mileage over a season, which we know is a pain point for the teams because naturally it comes with more costs. But if they can knock, say, 50 kilometers off Townsville and Adelaide, as Cameron Waters has suggested, it may help balance the books that little bit more. Now, I know that's going to be controversial, suggesting we take miles away from some of those marquee events on the calendar, but if we can redistribute that race length among some of the other events, I feel we'll have a far more rounded championship, and hopefully one that puts up more consistent, entertaining races. The rain is starting to fall here in Perth, so before my tin patio overwhelms my voice with noise, I'm going to try and wrap this one up with the weekend rating. Of course, for you guys, you voted 4 out of 5 stars, the majority of you. I'm actually more on the 3-star range. The strategy was interesting this weekend. It set us up for an interesting back half of the championship as well, but there wasn't quite as much wheel-to-wheel action as I was expecting going into the weekend. So still a solid weekend, but certainly hoped we would have had more fireworks on the track. As usual, I picked a few of your comments to round this one out, and overall everyone seems to be feeling pretty positive after that weekend. First comment here from 74 Pelicans saying, indoor sprint events, this is what supercars should be, and I cannot agree with you more on that one, Pelican. The second comment from Ron Smith saying, loving supercars at the moment, great racing, heaps of strategies and different race winners and pole winners each weekend. And yeah, we are seeing good variety as well, aren't we? Of course, Chaz has been pretty strong towards the front the past couple of rounds, but there's still so many storylines behind him at the moment. And then finally, from Running on 7 Cylinders, he says, a good weekend for strategy. 1 stops, 2 stops, and even 3 stops might have been considered. And yeah, that may be a bit of a byproduct of SMP and its unique nature in terms of high tire deck. We may not see that same strategy variance even if this format is rolled out of the tracks, but nevertheless, it's really good to see and still offers far more potential than those short sprint races that we unfortunately do have on the calendar. But that will bring my round review to a close. We've got a bit of a wait on our hands now before they stick with the cold weather theme and head south to Tasmania, a fantastic little track, one of my personal favorites on the calendar, although when there's only 12 events, I feel like I say that about all of them. Nevertheless, I'm really excited for supercars to be back in action already. Of course, be sure to subscribe if you want to be here when I drop my round review for that one. And I'm hoping to take the opportunity over this short break in the season to get some more discussion videos out there as well. As always, eager for your thoughts down below. Treat people like your trackside though, and I will see you in the next one.